There's a $49 billion, keep in mind Trump wanted $5 billion for his wall. It's a $49 billion subsidy to the nuclear industry going on. You got to see this interview with Kevin Kamps. It's mind-blowing. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, ding the bell, make your comments, and be sure to share this program with your friends. So let's check in with our old buddy Kevin Kamps. He's the radioactive waste specialist at beyondnuclear.org. The Twitter handler is Beyond Nuclear. Kevin, welcome back.
Hey, Tom. Good to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you with us. So, first of all, Fukushima, they have been accumulating massive amounts of radioactive water as they've been trying to keep these melted down reactor cores cool or keep them from blowing up. What's the status of all that right now?
Well, the environment minister under Shinzo Abe, the prime minister of the so-called Liberal Democratic Party, just said this morning that they have no option but to dump 1 million tons of highly radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. They've been trying to get away with this for years, but the fishing cooperatives along that Japanese coastline and other governments like South Korea have stopped them thus far, but they keep pushing at it. And the upcoming Tokyo Olympics of 2020 are adding to the pressure. So we're talking, approaching 300 million gallons of highly radioactive water. And the environment minister said we need to dilute it in the ocean. And the lie there is that through bioaccumulation in the food chain, that hazardous radioactivity will reconcentrate and people will eat it in seafood.
So instead of just mercury in your tuna, you're going to have cesium.
And shamefully, there are American consultants, namely Lake Barrett, formerly of the Department of Energy, and Dale Klein, former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, on hire to Tokyo Electric Power Company, pushing for this massive dump into the ocean.
Holy cow. Okay, so there's that. Now, also we're discovering that we have been subsidizing, I think it's kind of widely known and widely reported that we're spending worldwide hundreds of billions of dollars a year subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. The U.S. government spends a lot, billions of dollars every year subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. And we all know about the implicit subsidy through the Price-Anderson Act, which says that because nuclear reactors are so dangerous, literally no actual for-profit insurance company will insure any of them. So you and I do, the federal government does. And that's, a subsidy of sorts. But it turns out that there's actual dollar subsidies that individual states are paying to keep some of these reactors going. Tell me about this.
Well, just recently, July 27th, the Ohio legislature, in its lack of wisdom, approved a nearly $1 billion bailout for 2 reactors in Ohio, including Davis-Besse, one of the most dangerous reactors in the world. They're going to keep rolling the dice, keep rolling the radioactive Russian roulette wheel. And that's on people's electric bills against their will, even if they don't get electricity from the plant. If you live in Ohio, you're going to be paying towards that $1 billion bailout. But that's just the latest. There have been already more than $14 billion in old reactor bailouts in places like New York, Illinois, Connecticut, New Jersey. They're coming back in Pennsylvania. Some good news from Pennsylvania is 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is finally shutting down permanently, but they're going to try to bail out the rest of the reactors in the state. But again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The Union of Concerned Scientists did a report in 2011 documenting not tens, but hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies that the American people have put forward towards nuclear power in the last half century.
Yeah, this is mind-boggling. So the numbers I have, and let me know if any of these are inaccurate. New York State, $7.6 billion bailout for nuclear power. Illinois, $2.3 billion. And Exelon is coming back for a second round. New Jersey, $2.7 billion. Connecticut, $1.65 billion. Total, more or less, $15 billion. But that doesn't even scratch the surface of the cost of storing the nuclear waste that is at all these nuclear power plants all around the country that they want to put at Yucca Mountain. What's the price tag going to be for that?
The most recent estimate by the Department of Energy several years ago was $96 billion. So it's well over $100 billion now, just adjusting for inflation. But incredibly, through damage awards awarded by the U.S. court system, the nuclear power industry is raking in something like $500 million to $750 million per year in damage awards because the Department of Energy hasn't started taking the high-level radioactive waste away from the commercial reactors. So that's an outlay from the U.S. Treasury. It's called the Judgment Fund. So that's a taxpayer subsidy. And then people are paying the nuclear waste fee, or at least they used to until they ended it, towards yucca, towards permanent geologic disposal. And that pot of money is over $40 billion, but they've stopped collecting. And it's going to, like I said before on the yucca price tag, it's more than $40 billion. It's $100 billion. So guess what? They would come back to the U.S. taxpayers to take care of that shortfall.
And that stuff is still going to be, I mean, talk about the science of this for a minute. The science of what's happening with the Fukushima. You know, if they dump 300 million gallons of highly radioactive waste water into the Pacific Ocean, how does that, you know, you mentioned it would bioaccumulate the food chain. You want to explain that real quickly, and how might that affect us here in the United States, number one? And number two, what happens to nuclear waste over time?
Well, the main hazard in the Fukushima wastewater is tritium at nightmarish levels. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, which means when ingested, when you eat fish, you can breathe it, you can drink it. But when it binds in your organs, tissues, and cells, it could stick around and do tremendous damage with beta radiation emissions at a very intimate level, right down to your DNA molecule. And that's how it can cause cancer, it can cause birth defects, it can cause genetic damage. So in terms of high-level radioactive waste, like here in the United States, it's deadly for more than 1 million years. We sued the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They were forced to acknowledge there's 1 million years of hazard, but there's other radioactive poisons in there, like iodine-129, which is hazardous for 150 million years. So this is really forevermore hazard. It's a curse on all future generations. We have to keep it out of the environment somehow. Good luck with that, but we have to protect future generations. We need to stop making it is what needs to happen.
Yeah, amen. Isn't the radioactive iodine tied? I recall, this was years ago, reading a study, and I thought it came out of the Union of Concerned Scientists, that following the above-ground nuclear bomb tests out in the West, back in the late 50s, early 60s, I guess it was, that in the decade or two following that, as the plume of radioactive material traveled across the United States, within that plume, you know, coming out of, the far west and spreading, you know, as far north as northern Michigan and as far south as, you know, I guess the central part of the South, maybe Atlanta area, that there was an increase, a measurable increase that kind of followed that plume of, in particular, women, but also some men, getting thyroid disease and having to go on things like Synthroid or Armour for the rest of their lives as a consequence of exposure to that radioactive iodine. Am I remembering that correctly, or has that been disproven, Kevin?
No, it's been proven more and more over time as the government has finally been forced to admit what they did in Nevada in the 1950s, 1960s, and even after, because a third of the underground tests leaked. And radioactive iodine-131, which has a short half-life, a short hazardous persistence, but nonetheless caused this epidemic of thyroid disease in the United States. And the same thing happened at Chernobyl with that reactor explosion, meltdown, and also at Fukushima, massive amounts of iodine-131, which attacks the human thyroid gland. It has a 80-day hazard, but it does all that damage in that short period of time. But this other isotope, iodine-129, has 157 million years of hazard, where it can attack your thyroid. And then cesium-137, another radioactive poison, also attacks the thyroid. So there are over 200 radioactive isotopes in high-level radioactive waste. We know the hazards of some of them. Some of them haven't even been studied. We don't even know what their hazards are. These are artificial radioactive poisons that didn't exist in nature before the atomic age.
And because they didn't exist in nature, the body doesn't quite know exactly what they are. I understand that there is one isotope, radioactive isotope, that the body mistakes for phosphorus, and so it absorbs it and buries it in our bones, where it causes bone cancer. Another that it mistakes for potassium, and so it ends up in our muscles. One that it thinks is calcium. I clarify this for me. I may be wrong on these.
Right. So cesium-137 in the same row on the periodic table as potassium, the body mistakes it as something nutritious and useful. So the cesium-137 concentrates in muscle tissue and has caused epidemics like Chernobyl heart in newborns in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. Strontium-90, the body mistakes for useful calcium, and it goes to the bones and is tremendously biologically hazardous. Plutonium, this artificial isotope, mimics iron and does tremendous damage in the human system. And we mentioned iodine, which in a place like Belarus is scarce in the food chain, and so Belarusian thyroid glands just ate it up, and now an epidemic of thyroid pathology in Belarus. But in Poland, they distributed potassium iodide tablets to people, and they averted at least that thyroid epidemic associated with iodine-131. But like I said, cesium-137 attacks the human thyroid. So Poland, even with that tablet distribution, didn't escape all health maladies.